It's always encouraging to get the applause up front. That way when we mess this up, y'all won't be too mad at us. Can you hear that all right? Is it getting better? Part of it's just going to be my terrible voice. So the rest of it, if you can understand it, we're good. But I don't have a Dean Fish voice. So if I need to get him down here to interpret what I'm saying, we can do that too, maybe. We are going to do a couple of things. The title of this is actually Chuteside Manners, and I've been doing those things. In fact, the first time I think Curt ever saw me, I was doing one of these 10 or 12 years ago. And it's something we've done to talk about beef quality assurance and where to give injections and how to process cattle. And there's a whole lot of stuff we could do here Chuteside, but since we are in a stockmanship and stewardship mode, we're going to talk a little bit about getting the cattle ready before we process them, and that's what we'll do first, and talk about some things we can do to get cattle working for us a little better. And even if you're just receiving cattle, and I don't know how many of you cow-calf, how many stocker, preconditioners, whatever you might be, but when you first get those cattle in, and we'll be have another session on just settling cattle, and so I won't steal all of that, but you may not be able to get back for that, so we'll cover some of that in this session as well. But just getting the cattle where they'll respond to you, make it a little easier and quieter when they come through the chutes. A lot of the trouble we have in processing cattle is the fact that we're ramming them through a little bit quicker probably than they're ready for. And when we do that, they may be bouncing around in the chute a little more, so giving shots are a little harder to do. Bending needles is a more likely process or accident that might happen. So the quieter and calmer we can get them in the chute, the better. Now, we have to realize that, we've got this flat zone that we all talk about around cattle, and these cattle, they're all different. All of them have a little different pressure point. We don't really ever want to elicit the flat response. We want to get that down where we just have a pressure zone around those cattle. Well, right now, they can back off in that corner and take the pressure off. But when we start putting them in alleyways, sweep systems, single file alleyway leading up to the chute, they really can't take pressure off. So then it becomes our job to position ourselves so when they respond to us, they take pressure off by moving away from us. And when we get them into a working lead up, alleyway, race, whatever you want to call it, crowd alley, coming up to the chute, that's a lot of pressure. And we see a lot of cattle really get stressed in that 20 feet right there. They can come out of the box because they have a release. But when we put them in there and we're processing cattle, if somebody's in the wrong spot or there's distractions or pressure on them all the time, that's when we start seeing cows rear up, trying to jump out, run backwards, crawl into the chute, whatever. Those are all symptoms of too much pressure being put on those cattle. And that's the only way they see to take it off is to try to make some big move to do that. So what we'd like to try to do is get them to where they're coming in calmly, and I think we also have a session on creating flow. So as we get these cattle to work for us very nicely, we can really go through this process quickly, but very smoothly. And some people perceive that as being slow when you're not ramming and jamming and pipes aren't clanging and banging and dogs aren't barking and people aren't screaming at one another. That's perceived to be slow. But that's something we'd like to eliminate because all that is distractions, all that's additional pressure that the cattle can't get away from if we're continuing to do that to them. So, I used to start all these by saying if we could get everybody to go home and just be quiet when they work cattle, it would be an improvement. And some of you I use this all the time, some of you might just explode if that was the case, right? You just got to vent some. But try to control it a little bit because that is additional pressure. And really, it's not that much help in getting cattle to do what you want them to do. Most of the time, we're just trying to vent ourselves because we're frustrated with what we're asking not happening right. Anybody ever been in a fight with a family member working cows? All right. If we learn how to work cattle a little better, we can eliminate some of that as well. And that makes everything at the chute a little easier. Because it's always easier if your spouse or family member stays there with you rather than leave you and go home, okay? So you have more help that way. So all this kind of comes into play when we're talking about handling cattle at a chute. We need enough help, but not too much help. Because if you get too many people around a chute in the alleyway, tubs, boxes, whatever it might be, once again, the cattle can't take pressure off. And we have some pretty big crew sometimes come gather cattle there in Texas. We may have 15 to 17 people gather cattle. When you get down to working cattle, you probably ought to send about 2/3 of them off to do something else, because they're going to be standing around in the way and everybody's a little bit distracted. So you need probably 4 to 5 people to make most systems work pretty good, and maybe rotate people in and out, because fatigue is a big issue as well. If we just work the same 5 people on 1,000 head of cattle, we get kind of worn out. But if you can rotate positions or do some other things, so a lot of times we'll put what's considered, I might consider the least qualified person in the back. May not be the least qualified, but it's the one you don't want to deal with up here. Y'all ever do that? Put old Joe in the back so you don't have to listen to him all day. That may not be the best person to be back there. He may need to make a rotation through it, but once again, try to figure out where people need to be in the system to make it flow better. So very often our best stockmen are up here at the front of the chute, when in fact we may want them in the back, sending cattle and creating that flow we're going to talk about. But as we look at these cattle, they're even paying attention. They're trying to see if we actually know what we're talking about. They're all turning around looking at us. So school is in, right? And Curt was talking this morning about 3 different types of pressure: driving pressure, drawing pressure, and maintain. Is that the other one? Where you just put pressure and maintain it in a low spot. It may be moving as the cattle move, but those are all things we have to understand a little bit to get cattle to work for us. The drawing pressure I like to use a lot if you can, getting cattle to flow by you and come by you. Right now I don't know how these cattle are going to react. We did a little bit with them horseback a while ago, but that's all. So we'll just try to move them around a little bit and see how they act. But
and they were also using the chute demo.
Oh, that's right. They were used down in the chute demos earlier. So they've been through some chutes and they've been through some different scenarios. But we'll just try to get them to move around here a little bit and see how they actually work. I'm going to try to step over here, and Curt can too, and we'll just bring them back around the chute. And here, as Curt goes to them, I'm just going to hold position. I'll have to move a little bit, and then I can step in and put pressure. We don't want to both be putting a lot of pressure. See, I almost turned them back on Curt. He had to move over to pick them up on the other side. And that's something else, is we put too much pressure in the wrong spot. I'm going to step in here just a little bit to draw the ride back around, but I've got to then control the front. And I don't want to get too close to the front or I'll stop my motion. Here I'm going to try to step up, put just a little more pressure. As far as I know, these cattle have not been around this chute yet. So we're just, now I've got to make sure they don't turn back, let Curt put most of the pressure. But this little red one, he wanted to back up. So I've got to be able to put pressure where I need to. And just ease them up here. Rather than hoop and holler and raise a lot of cane, we can send them in here pretty soft and pretty quiet. And there's a lot of pressure. You know, when we look at this scenario, there's not many cattle would want to walk up in there, right? But when we get our pressure right, keep our pressure point right, they just drift up in there pretty easy. That was pretty nice.
Good.
All right. You never know till you push them. That's the first time we've really worked them on foot in particular. So you don't know how they're going to do it. Now, as long as we've backed off and kept our pressure off of them, they're still going away from us, aren't they? And so if I want to draw them out, all I've got to do is put just a little bit of pressure. I'll put a little bit of push on them. I don't know, I might have to put more than I think. But they're going to want to start taking pressure off. So as I put pressure and kind of hold my pressure here, then they're going to start drifting out. I'm going to do the moonwalk plumb out of here. But now I've got some draw, and I can start letting these cattle come out. If they want to go too fast, we have to back off pressure. That stops them. Instead of going at them, you want to back off. I'm going to draw this little black calf's eye out. I'm going to try to slow them down as they come. Now I'm going to keep backing up, so I don't want her to turn back again. Let her go. Then we're teaching these cattle to come out a little bit. Now as they're looking at Curt, I'm going to let him get them faced to me, and then I can draw them out. And I'd like for them to walk, slow them down as much as I can, but I'd like for them to keep coming on that side. Now when Curt put more pressure on them, we started good draw and good flow, but then it got harder to stop a little bit. Okay, so that's where you have to learn where to put the gas, where to take the pressure off. to make the cattle work for you. But nothing happened in there that was distracting to those cattle, so they should go back in that system pretty easy if that's where the pen we needed to go. If we needed to pen part of them, we can. If we want to work them around a little bit more, we can. We'll actually let them try to come between us. Let's put them down by the little gate, Curt. They'll just take them there and then we'll let them come out between us. Because cattle need to learn to work off both eyes. And so we can do that in alleyways, working on both sides of the alley. So heifer here, she needs a little push every once in a while. Now if we want them to go that corner, I've got to come out over here and stop them from coming down. So I'm up a little further than I was a while ago. But me being out here, then I can keep the front straight and we can get them into that corner. Okay. Now this is where, once they get there, if we back off, they'll probably stay. These cattle actually place fairly well. If you want them to stay anywhere very long, you're probably going to have to get them where they're not all facing the same direction. But we can actually just keep putting a little pressure and turning these cattle. Earlier we put them in that little gate, first time we did anything with them. All right, so now as they start to turn back, and if you'll hesitate just a little bit, these cattle figure out that it's easy enough to turn around and come out of there. So here we have a little bit of draw, and Curt and I both can back up and slow it down or speed it up, however we need to do it. If they get too fast, you can back up, take pressure off, give them time to think. Maybe. Now, coming between them, we had never done that before. We probably should have just let them ease between us, maybe, to get them used to it. They actually took to running off quicker than I thought they might. But they get used to being able to come between us. We're going to go back the other way with them now. They may step into that gate to take the pressure off. Here we can pull them out. Just by walking up here, we've drawn them out of that corner. And if they get to going too fast, I can step up and slow them down a little bit. I don't want to get them to running. We don't need a bunch of Forrest Gumps out here. But we can teach them to go a little bit slower. Once again, you got to figure out where to put your pressure and where not to. But as a group, they stay together pretty well. Once they get to moving, and that's very typical. When you get a lot of draw with the cattle trotting out, they want to come a little faster. Now we'll take a little different tack maybe this way, Curt. I guess we just spread out a little and try to let them ease through without putting so much pressure. But if we can slow them down just a little bit. If this old gray heifer will kind of walk or trot out, now we can kind of slow these others down. She's a big draw to these others, but by changing our position and spreading it out a little bit, a lot of people will try to make that gap narrower to try to slow them down, but here it actually is working better with us further apart because it's less pressure and they can take the pressure. The big white heifer really wants to leave. She's just not real sure she should yet. Now I'm going to let Curt step up because he can draw their eye around and pull them out just enough to get them to come by. Old little yellow turn back. So now if we get much speed coming out, we can back up, take pressure off, change our position. But that movement draws cattle out. Now when you have one leave that fast, sometimes you really get a lot of big flush. That's kind of what we got a while ago. Now Blackie will back up. A little yellow calf, if he'll go ahead and go, he's been wanting to pretty bad. But here we're at least able to let these cattle out one at a time without them really running off. I can step out and probably release this black-eyed heifer. I can step back in and stop the next one. So here we start getting a lot of control on these cattle from a big distance. They did not take the pressure well a while ago. I just don't want her running off. because that creates more draw, more pressure. This is getting really nice to watch what we can do from the distance and figure out where the buttons are on these cattle. They can't take a lot of pressure. This little calf's got a lot of gas to him too. So if we were to try to hold him back, it's really going to put a lot of pressure on him. And these two don't really care. All right. But as interesting as they come out of here calm, they actually went to the pens. A while ago when they went out fast, they actually turned around to see where the pressure was going to come again. That was really pretty nice, just how soft they went into that system, and how, once again, people are afraid to be wrong when they're working cattle. You got to figure out where their buttons are, particularly if they're fresh cattle, and figure out where you have to be to make that work. When they come out of here a while ago, I didn't think coming between us would be that big a deal, but the white heifers don't like it, okay? So over time, we can get them where they respond a lot better. They were actually, other than the first one out, real responsive to us. And so we kind of have a little control on them. Anything you want to add? Good question. He's asked if there are just one or two left at the end. Do you assume that they're going to want to break and run? A lot of times that will be either the really nervous ones or the really gentle ones. And so the one thing you don't want to do is just turn around and walk off from them. You want to go ahead and step to them and make them come so they understand that it's still an ask and they have to respond to you, okay? So that's something that I really hadn't thought about that much when I was working over in Australia last year. That guy always made a point to make that last step to let them know that you're asking them to come. And in the wilder ones, it may just be a step to the side. But either way, you got to ask. Sometimes, like I said, it'll be the wild ones, and sometimes it's going to be the gentle ones. All right, get my little show and tell up here. There's a lot of different coolers around these days. This is a VaxMate cooler made by a company here in Texas, it's Pierce Manufacturing. I think this one you can enter a drawing over here at the Preferred booth. They're going to give this one away, so I left the tickets over there just so I don't think there's any graft and corruption going on. But this was designed when you're working cattle at the chute, and most everybody's kind of quit doing this, but you back your pickup up and work off the tailgate. Anybody do that? All right. Used to, we just left all our syringes laying on the tailgate. Okay, so is anybody still doing that? Don't have to raise your hand, but if you are, don't do that. Sunlight will break down vaccines pretty quick. The ultraviolet light, and this barrel is not even opaque. They make some barrels now that are opaque that block some UV light. So if you're going to do that, make sure you cover them up some way. We like to keep vaccine cool. We talk about that all the time, try to keep it cool and in the dark. The dark is the UV light. The cool is to keep heat, allows bacteria to grow. Now, realize that heat is not going to kill a vaccine. Everybody gets a little interested there. Because we take a 45-degree cooler, vaccine, draw it up, and stick it in a 100-degree animal. So heat doesn't kill it. Heat deteriorates it over time, okay? So a lot of us are more concerned about keeping one cold than we are out of the sunlight, okay? And keeping it cool over time is important. But the worst thing you can do is to freeze vaccine. And we see some people so overzealous to keep it cool that we actually freeze the products. And then the other part of that is, how many of you have your very best refrigerator in the barn? You put it in the barn because it was freezing the milk or the beer, one of the two, right? All right, so if it's freezing the milk or the beer, get you a little thermometer and figure out what the temperature range is on that. If you're going to be storing much vaccine, invest in a thermometer that records the high and the low within that range. That way you can tell if it's getting out of range on the top or freezing stuff on the bottom. Because a lot of times it will freeze it, but it thaws before you get there to look at it. Now we actually went up to, I hate to tell this on A&M, but at our beef center, we walked in there to vaccinate some cattle, and you could have played hockey with that vaccine bottle. When it freezes, it ruptures the cells in that vaccine and actually can create endotoxins. and that can kill your cattle when you give it to them. So you don't ever want to freeze one of them. One reason modified live vaccines are dehydrated, one good thing about them, you can't freeze that. If it's just a diluent and a modified live, the freezing doesn't rupture the cells, okay? So when you put them back together, it will if you freeze it, but you're not supposed to store them that long. So keep that in mind as you're working on that. This little cooler actually has a thermometer on the side of it that tells you what the temperature in the box is all the time. And you can set it to go off with an alarm if it gets out of temperature range. So there's a lot of different things out there. I like this one if I'm working on a table. And the first ones I ever built were out of Omaha steak boxes with a hole cut in the side of them. You can set them on the table and slide your syringes in there. They work. This is just pretty handy because you can also keep your beer cold in the bottom of this one. Omaha steak didn't have enough room. But if you're working on a table, it's very ergonomically right. You can go in and out pretty easy with those. If you are working cattle on the ground and you want your syringes and everything closer to the ground, there's actually some boxes right over there that are made with holes in the top of them that you can act easier to put one in if it's sitting on the ground. If this one's sitting on the ground, you got to lean down and try to get your syringe in it. So there's pros and cons to both kind of designs, okay? But the main thing is to keep them where they are easy to get to and out of the sunlight. This one I really like because it kind of protects the syringe. The other part about this one, on the inside, you cannot stick yourself with a needle. The old Omaha steak box, you could. All right, so now there's actually a lot of BQA programs around the country that show you how to take a ice chest and put PVC pipe in it and kind of protect yourself as well. I see some boxes that have holes in the lid, and when you raise the lid, all the needles are sticking out in the box and right there by your arm. I don't care for those at all because you're running some safety risk with that. So these work really good. And there's a reason this one only has 3 holes on it. Why would you only have 3 holes? Some of you might give 4 vaccines. Can you possibly give 4 vaccines on one side of an animal's neck and be in compliance with BQA standards? No. So that's why we settled on 3. If you need to do more, you need to be on the other side, you need to have another box. Okay? Or something that doesn't require refrigeration, dewormer, ejectable, something like that. So this is for your vaccines, anything that needs to be kept cool in the dark. Some of the other products don't, dewormers don't have to be. Talk a little bit about continuous feed syringes as well. Do you maybe use those that have the hose on them? Do you use them for vaccines? A lot of people use them, but they don't use them for vaccines. The problem is you can't sterilize that tube very well, and it's kind of hard to keep out of the sunlight unless you put a sheet over it. Now, if you are doing that, a friend of mine here in Texas come up with a great idea. She takes that wiring cable covers that you put on electrical cables, just kind of slide around those tubes, and it keeps them in the dark. Really good. Don't make them out of black because that absorbs heat. There's some red ones, yellow ones, whatever it might be. That can also color code and label your syringes when you have different colors on them. I see people take old pant legs and sew them up and put them around there too. There's all sorts of different ways to do it. That brings up a good point. You ought to label your syringes. Here's why. If you mix vaccines in a syringe, it may inactivate the vaccine that just pull in there. The adjuvants are different, the carriers are different, and they don't always mix well, okay? So always make sure you use the same syringe for the same product all the time. To sterilize a syringe, most of these are made to pull the barrel off and boil it. And don't use disinfectants in them because that will leave some residue, and when you pull some vaccine into it, and that means soap, don't use soap and water. If you do, you've got to triple and quadruple rinse it to get all the soap out of it. Don't draw. I've been to a lot of cattle working with. I actually have a bottle of alcohol there, and they pull alcohol in there and they'll clean their syringe right before they start. Don't do that. The other thing I said, well, this one here has been lubricated. How much of your lubricant is sterile? When they first get it, it is, but a lot of times that old stuff sits around forever and it may not be sterile. We're putting it on the inside of our gun. So I try not to ever lubricate these kind of syringes, but use the vaccine to do that. Now there's some products you got to lubricate. Any oil-based vaccines, they lubricate very well. In fact, you can't hardly keep the thing from sliding once you use an oil-based product on it. Can you use olive oil? It's kind of the same thing. It's not part of the vaccine. You leave too much residue in there. I know people use castor oil, but most of these syringes will come with a sterile lubricant, and you might try to keep getting that if you want to lubricate one of them. Now the old style syringes that had you got the little knob on them, you tighten the rubber up, you can't move that without lubricating it. So those kind of syringes I use for something that lubrication is not going to inactivate the vaccine. It might be a dewormer or some other product that I'd use with one of those, but I would not use it with vaccines. The more we learn about handling vaccines, the better off we are, and more we know what to do with them. These guns are pretty good about being accurate in using them, but always make sure that they're set where they're supposed to be. I see so many people get started and you'll see them look over there like, yeah, that was on 4 or it wasn't on the right dose. The other thing about it, if you're using 2cc products, go to a 25cc gun. It's got a smaller barrel. That way when you pull the handle, it actually feels like you're delivering product. Because if you do 2cc's on one of these, it doesn't feel like you moved the plunger. And so you're never real sure whether you gave that shot. At least I'm not. And so once you move that, it doesn't move much on a 2cc shot. So I'd go to the other part of that. If you do that, if you'll change your needle every time before you fill your syringe up, you'll do it about every 10 to 12 head. Keep your needles sharp. Now I know some of you try to see if you can go all day without changing a needle. Don't do that. About every 10 head, you ought to change it, particularly if you're using the disposable monoject needle, because there's been some really good BQA, well, they actually took a microscope and took a picture of the end of that needle, and after about 3 head, it really starts to deteriorate. And by 10 head, it's full of trash, debris, and it is scuffed up bad by 10 head. And so that was really telling. I didn't realize how bad they broke down going through the hide just that few times, but they do. And so don't keep it until you pull it out. And anytime it gets burred, change it. As Rick Machin, a colleague of mine, once said, if that cost of that needle is what's keeping you in or out of the cow business, just go ahead and get out now. Okay, because that's not going to keep you in or out. All right, so with that said, anybody have any questions or arguments? Those are all old standard stuff we talk about in the BQA program. Curt, why don't we go ahead and try to bring some through? We may actually let a few through, and then we'll stop one and do a little work on it. So if you're working on your chute, get this thing set to where you'd be able to reach from your head gate around to your chute. Now every chute ought to have neck access on it. This one has a little area right here that you can reach through to give shots. We'll get an animal in here and talk about where to put that shot in just a minute. In fact, I'll try to move this where it's not blocking quite as much. But that location on the neck is really important. The reason being, any subcutaneous injections ought to be in that neck under the skin. There are some other places we can put sub-Q, but if we're having to use other places other than the neck, we're probably putting too much product in them for one day. Probably ought to spread that out over multiple trips through. All right, this is really nice. These cattle are easing in. They've not been through this system over here, I don't think, have they, Todd? So this will be their first trip. So as Curt's easing these in, these cattle, this is a bud box system. If you're not familiar with kind of a bud box, it's got a little point down here in this end, so if the cattle happen to stick their head in that corner, they may not come out quite as easy. But what Curt's doing, he's just doing the same thing we did out here. He can put pressure on them to come around, and when they do, the only place they can go is out this chute. Now notice I have my head gate open. I'm either going to have my head gate open or cattle in the chute. Now this one's not going to come by me, so I'll just set a self catch right here, and I can step down her side Send the forward, I can step up, hopefully stop that one. If that one doesn't go ahead and stick right in, I can do it very quietly and very easily. You don't want them running in and hitting the head gate. And I'm gonna back off so maybe she'll, just being that close to the chute, see how she was stirred up, as I back off, it calms her down a little bit. But what we want to do is try to work in this area behind the head gate, or if you have an extender out in front of the chute, then that can extend their neck and give you access there. If an animal pushes up against the head gate, the best thing to do a lot of times is step here and try to get them to back up. And see, her neck is exposed on the other side now. So I can work around the chute and give her a shot right here through this area and right into the appropriate area. So think about how your chute works. Every one of them works a little different. So they're going to have the chute out. They've had 2 of them already, had another one this afternoon. But all of them work just a little bit differently. So the main thing is to get them in here and be quiet. I never dreamed this heifer would be this quiet in here, but she brought in quiet. We brought her in the chute quiet. She hadn't banged and clanged on anything, and she's ready to go. So when I get ready to release her, I'm also going to be ready to open the back so I can use it to draw this next one in. She likes this preferred chute. She's going to stay a while, which is fine. I'm not going to get after her the first time through it, but I step up, put a little pressure. But by doing that, we create that draw. It's always interesting to watch. We get to watch, and I do this all the time, I get to watching what's happening up here and I'm causing issues behind me. But this thing, if I work this heifer, I can let her go, pop the gate. I'm always gonna slow that one down if it's going too fast, where it doesn't really hammer into that chute. Then you can, if you've got your box right here, you can really process them pretty quick. And I don't, and I'm not gonna let him go till he quits wiggling. But when as soon as he quits, I will let him go. And you can put a squeeze on him that's set a little bit wide, but there he quit. If you're processing a lot of cattle, you can't necessarily do that all the time, but you can put a squeeze on them and slow them down. Now you, yep. If you ever miss them more than twice, you got trouble. Curt was sure hoping I missed that one. If you ever want pressure on you, work the chute in front of about 200 people. Now that little calf draws from way back there. But by being able, these head gates allow you to fan them just a little bit, really slows cattle coming in. You don't just cram into the head gate, which really makes me like this. All right. But even as,
I made one mistake.
What's that?
I should have went back and sorted my cattle up for size before I brought them in.
Curt brought up a point there. We had mixed sizes in that group, right? So if you get it narrow enough for the little ones, the big ones can't get through. If you got it wide enough for the big ones, the little ones can turn around. But the good thing about this, with just a little sorting, you can change this alleyway real quick and be able to get the cattle in there like they need to be.
And we were able to go slow enough.
Right.
If you're processing a lot of cattle.
Yeah. You don't want them turning back on you, and that's one good thing about this adjustable alleyway here. And if you're doing that, invest in a good adjustable alleyway, for goodness sakes, because there's nothing more frustrating. See how quick we were adjusting the alleyway? If we had those frames all the way down the alley, we can go down to calf size or bull size, just that quick, and it's adjusted. Every company has one that adjusts. You just got to figure out if you're going to be willing to pay for it. Most of us are too tight to buy one of these, and so we build one that's too wide because we got to get our cows and our bulls through it. Then our calves turn around, and whoever's in the back's got to straighten them out all the time. Here's a tip for you really thrifty folks. If you've got one that does not adjust, you can take some of these panels and stick down on the inside of that chute and narrow it down, and you don't have to rebuild your chute. If you really need to narrow it down, you can drop a 4x4 in between the panel and the side of it and make an adjustable alley that way. I did that for years. So I was pretty thrifty for a while. Okay, so it actually works really good. Just drop some panels in there, put some boards between them, and you've got an adjustable alleyway right there. So don't think you can't adjust what you've got. Any questions? It's been a lot of fun, but anybody got any questions?
In Nogales, we use pallets.
Pallets, pallets actually work pretty good, but you will learn to put the slats up and down and not sideways. So even pallets have to be used appropriately. I don't like tires in there. I see people putting tires in to narrow one down, but you can get legs up, cattle upside down. That doesn't work as well. So, but the panels really do work good.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's give Curt and Ron a big, big round of applause.